where you can put them.
If you get a minute this week, we'd love for you to check out our website, planttalkradio.com, and also our Facebook page as well, and hit the like button. More from Fred Howard, the Ohio nurseryman, coming up next on Plant Talk. Stick around.
This summer at Franklin Park Conservatory and Botanical Gardens, the gardens are in full color. Walk amidst tropical and native butterflies in flight in the indoor Pacific Island Water Garden. View the conservatory's bonsai collection and experience the exhibition Origami in the Garden. Find details at fpconservatory.org.
And welcome back to the program. Mark News here alongside Fred Howard, the Ohio nurseryman. And Fred, a couple of folks called in during the break. They didn't want to be on the radio, but they had a couple of questions for you. And one of them is that, and it's kind of interesting because you talked about all the rain you got the other day, and you and I, by the crow flies, probably about 4 or 5 miles apart, and I didn't get enough to wet the pavement.
Is that right?
Yeah, it just passed us right by and hit Worthington where you live, and but you know, so the question is, especially when it comes, their question was about their knockout roses.
Okay.
How often to water?
Okay. I could be facetious at this point and say as needed. Now, that needs definition, however. As needed is a true statement, but what does it mean to the average gardener? Well, let me tell you that on my property, 1/4 acre, there's probably 4 different rain zones. Now, I don't mean 4 different depths or amounts of water that come down, although I have noted differences in the rain gauges, but it's a matter of how cool, how shady, or how windy or hot and so on, because plants' soil that they're in, even though it is a uniform situation or may be a uniform situation on their property, which is highly unlikely, there are still going to be rapid draining spots and then slower. The north side of my house is not wet by any means, but it will be slower to dry because there's very, very little sun that hits it. Now, this time of year where the sun's rising and it's, well, as a matter of fact, isn't it tomorrow or the next day, sun rises at its most north point and sets at its most north point and then heads back down on the horizon again until middle of winter. So, the north side of my place, I would not have to water nearly as much as on the south side. South side, just as conditions go, the soil was heavy clay. I finally worked it up, got a good garden going out of it for a while, but it's a 2-story house, light cream stucco that reflects heat, direct heat, and so on. I imagine if I planted a tomato plant in the sun on the south side, which is the only thing it could get, and then made sure it was out far enough from the house on the north side, I would still have to water them at different points. So what it boils down to is back to the stick trick. I still have mine from years ago when I was first gardening on the site. It's a 1/2-inch dowel rod, 3 foot long. It's pointed on one end like a pencil sharpener would. I have nicked it at 6-inch intervals, so I know how deep I'm shoving it in the soil. And I will go around still yet and check. Now, the top, well, let's just say from this point on, where we're getting to the heat of summer now, the top 1 inch or 2 can be dry, darn near bone dry, or certainly to the touch, but it can still be moist 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6 inches below grade. So that's why you need to use the stick or some such that you can work out on your own and find out where the moisture level is from 2 inches on down. Now, in annuals, the top 2 inches is pretty important. On perennials, let's just say the top 2 to 4 inches. On big trees, and I mean big trees now, 24, 36-inch trunks, big trees, they're still only going to be 3 foot deep in the ground, and usually most of the roots are in the top 24 inches. So it truly is a matter of knowing the site, checking it if you can, set up different rain gauges to see how much came down, and then water according to need. Usually, that's a good thorough soaking every 10 to 14 days, and by thorough soaking, I mean several hours, one spot, let it soak on down 6 or 10 inches in the ground, and then let the top inch dry out before you go back to it again in 10 to 14 days.
We also had a caller at 1-866-PLANT-TALK that wanted to know about the ground cover phlox. Usually these are the questions we get in the spring when it is so beautiful with all those little flowers, and this time of year it's a green but a nice ground cover.
It is a nice ground cover, Mark, and it's a large family of plants, phlox. Right now, the tall phlox are setting bud, but they're at 3 foot high. I think what this gentleman is asking about is probably the creeping phlox. It's going to be height of shoe leather, by that meaning maybe 3 inches tall. It spreads at this point to, it's recovering from the heavy blooming. It'll spread on out X inches to a foot or more, where you plant the plants during their bloom time or even just before that. And at this point, if you've put them in the ground 18 inches apart, they'll start to get together, and next spring, the odds are they will be growing together and flowering all the way across an 18-inch area for 2 plants. Creeping phlox is usually pinkish, reddish, or creamy or clear white. It's tough as nails in full sun. Do not put it where the drainage is bad, and do not put it in the shade. It will grow a little bit in the shade, won't flower well, and it'll be always pretty sparse. But out in the full sun, in a well-drained soil, it's just perfect. I have it where the edge of the bed, call it 0, and then it's about 4 inches high as the bed raises up toward the rear. And I have to use a spade and cut it back this time of year.
And this is the time of year, of course, that Fred's to-do list gets just a little bit longer, and we'll be doing that here coming up next on Plant Talk. And again, if you get a minute this week, check out planttalkradio.com and, of course, our Facebook page as well. And on planttalkradio.com, you can listen to our old programs. Fred coming up next with his to-do list. Stick around for that.
This summer at Franklin Park Conservatory and Botanical Gardens, the gardens are in full color. Welcome its tropical and native butterflies in flight in the indoor Pacific Island Water Garden. View the conservatory's bonsai collection and experience the exhibition Origami in the Garden. Find details at fpconservatory.org.
All right. I love hummingbirds. I think I know I've seen the male twice, and it's not uncommon for them to come set up territory and move on. And then I think the other day I saw what must be a baby. It just didn't appear to be as large as the adults. And of course, they're so darn small anyhow. But the reason for even mentioning them, my black and blue salvia, which is an annual here in this part of the world, is now coming into flower and quite nicely. And the little hummingbirds will come to it just about on the hour. Now, you can't set your watch by it, but at the same time, they are attracted to this plant. I'm not sure why. Everybody thinks about red when you think of hummingbirds, and yet you don't have to color the fluid. You don't have to do anything. But the blue and black salvia is well worth having to attract those little creatures. And then the coral bells and other things, and they're working the hosta heavy as they come into bloom, and so on. All right. Water and food for the birds. They do fend in nature and usually survive when we look out and think that's the case. However, a wildlife biologist friend of mine has assured me that 1/3 of the hatchlings or births in the spring never see cold weather. It's just that vicious out there. So do help the little rascals. And it's a good thing squirrels are the wards of the state of Ohio, or I'd be dealing with them in a little different way.
And thanks so much for joining us today. We'll see you again next week for another edition of Plant Talk.
Plant Talk is sponsored by Franklin Park Conservatory and Botanical Gardens, fpconservatory.org. If you have a question for Fred for a future show, go to our Facebook page and ask away. We value your comments about the show, so please tell us what you think by writing a review on iTunes. This helps others find out about Plant Talk. You can find out more about Plant Talk on our website at planttalkradio.com.